Sergeant Dale Briggs ripped the rifle out of the new sniper's hands, held it high over his head like a trophy, and turned in a slow circle so every soldier in the yard could see it. "Would you look at this?" he shouted, laughing so hard his voice cracked. "The Army sent us a scarecrow with a stick. Scratched wood, rust on the bolt. This thing's older than my grandfather's teeth." He dropped it into the dirt at her boots. "Pick up your antique. Fort Red Valley's a real base. We don't play with museum pieces here." Before we go any further, take 1 second and subscribe to the channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and comment the city you're watching from, because I want to see how far Emily Carter's story travels tonight. Emily Carter did not pick up the rifle right away. She looked at it lying in the dirt. Then she looked at Sergeant Briggs, and the thing that unsettled him most was that she did not look angry. She looked patient. She looked like a woman who had watched men bigger and louder than Briggs make the exact same mistake, and who had learned a long time ago that there was no point wasting words on people who were about to teach themselves a lesson. "You gonna cry?" Briggs asked, grinning at the men around him. "Corporal Ruiz, I think she's gonna cry." "I'm not going to cry," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, steady. It carried further than Briggs expected, and a few of the men stopped laughing. She crouched, lifted the rifle out of the dust, and wiped the bolt clean with 2 fingers in a slow, careful motion, the way a person handles something they trust more than they trust the people around them. Then she stood, slung it over her shoulder, and said nothing else. "That's it," Briggs said. "No speech. No you'll be sorry. Come on, give me something." "Where do I bunk?" Emily asked. That it was all. Where do I bunk? And somehow that question landed harder than any insult could have, because it told every man standing there that she did not consider Sergeant Dale Briggs important enough to argue with. Ruiz coughed to cover a laugh. Briggs shot him a look. "Second row end cot," Briggs said, jaw tight now. "By the window, coldest spot in the barracks. Enjoy." "Thank you," Emily said, and walked past him. She did not walk fast. She did not walk slow. She walked like someone who had already forgotten his name. Up on the 2nd floor of the command building, behind a window, streaked with old rain, Commander James Walker watched the whole thing without a word. He had been in the Army 18 years, 2 deployments. He had learned to read men the way other people read weather, and he had learned to read the space between what a soldier did and what a soldier felt. Most young snipers who got humiliated their first hour on a base did one of 2 things. They fought back too hard, or they folded up small and quiet and stayed that way. He had watched both 100 times. Emily Carter had done neither. She had let Briggs make himself look like a fool, and she had done it on purpose, and she had done it without lifting her voice 1 inch above calm. That was not the behavior of a girl who was scared. That was the behavior of someone who had been in rooms Walker could only imagine, and had come out the other side with nothing left to prove to a man like Briggs. "Who is she?" Walker said. His executive officer, Lieutenant Grant, checked the tablet. "Carter Emily, 26. Transfer request came through channels I don't recognize, sir. Half her files redacted, like aggressively redacted." "How aggressive?" "There's a 3-year gap where her assignment history just says, 'Other duties as assigned.' No unit, no location, no commanding officer listed." Walker was quiet for a moment. "Sir, get me what you can," Walker said, "and do it quiet. If somebody redacted a soldier's file that hard, they don't want us asking, which is exactly why I'm asking." Down in the barracks, Emily set her bag on the end cot by the window, unslung the rifle, and laid it across her knees. She did not unpack. She did not look for a friend. She sat with the weapon in her lap and ran her thumb along a long scratch in the wood, a scratch that ran from the stock nearly to the grip. And for 1 second, something passed across her face that had nothing to do with Fort Red Valley or Sergeant Briggs. Then it was gone. A private walked past a kid, maybe 19, freckled, trying not to stare and failing. Emily caught him looking. "You got something to say too?" she asked. Not unkind, just tired. "No, ma'am, I mean," the kid stopped. "I'm Hutchins. Private Hutchins. They shouldn't have done that. Out there, Briggs, I mean. That wasn't right." Emily studied him. "You always this honest. My mom says it's going to get me killed one day." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Your mom's probably right." She nodded at the cot next to hers. "That yours?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then I guess we're neighbors Hutchins." The kid grinned, sat, and immediately made the mistake of pointing at the rifle. Can I ask about no? Right, sorry. It's not personal, Emily said, and her voice changed just slightly the way a door changes when it's pushed almost shut. Some things you carry, you don't explain them. Hutchins nodded like he understood, which he did not yet, and went back to his own cot. But he kept sneaking looks at her at the way she sat with that rifle across her knees, like a mother holding a sleeping child, and something in the back of his mind whispered that the whole base had gotten this woman wrong, all of them, in a single afternoon. How long you been here, Hutchins? Emily asked, not looking at him. 8 months, ma'am. Anybody ever shoot at you in those 8 months? No, ma'am, nothing ever happens here. That's kind of the joke. Red Valley's where they send you when they forgot you exist. Emily's thumb stopped on the scratch. They didn't forget me, she said quietly. Somebody sent me here on purpose. She looked out the window, then out toward the gray line of mountains, and Hutchins couldn't have known it. But she wasn't looking at the mountains the way a person looks at scenery. She was reading them. Nothing ever happens here, she repeated almost to herself. Let's hope you're right, Hutchins. But she didn't sound like she believed it. That evening, the mess hall filled with the noise of 200 soldiers, and the story had already gotten bigger the way stories do. By the time Emily walked in with her tray, half the room had heard that Briggs put the new sniper in her place, and the other half had heard she took it standing still and cold as ice, and nobody could decide which version made her more interesting. Briggs was holding court at the center table. And I'm telling you, he was saying loud, I've seen the SEAL guys, I've seen the Marine Scout snipers, and every single one of them is running glass worth more than my truck. Thermal, range finding, the works. And this base in its infinite wisdom sends us a girl with a rifle that looks like it got dragged behind a Humvee for 40 miles. He slapped the table. We're all gonna die. The men laughed. Emily sat 2 tables away alone and ate. Hey, Briggs called out. Carter, come on, sit with the grown-ups. I'm just having fun. No hard feelings, right? She didn't answer. See, that's the thing. Briggs went on, turning back to his audience, but louder now, making sure she could hear. Snipers are supposed to be patient, but there's patient and there's just plain slow. My money's on slow. A voice cut across the room. That'll be enough, Sergeant. Commander Walker stood in the doorway with his tray. The room went quiet fast. Briggs straightened up. Sir, just breaking her in, sir. You've been on this base 4 years, Briggs, Walker said, walking to the serving line. How many confirmed engagements you got? Briggs hesitated. Well, the base hasn't seen action in... That's not what I asked. How many? None, sir. None, Walker repeated. He let it sit there in front of everybody. So before you spend another minute grading somebody else's rifle, you might want to remember that you've never once had to use yours. He carried his tray toward Emily's empty table and sat down across from her without asking. Carter, Commander, mind if I eat here? It's your base. Walker almost smiled. That's not what I asked either. Emily looked up from her food, and for a second, the two of them just measured each other the way 2 people do when they both know how to size up a person fast and neither one is used to being sized up back. Sit wherever you want, Commander, she said. He sat, he ate. He didn't fill the silence, which she noticed because most officers couldn't stand quiet and had to pour words into it. Walker just ate his food and let her be, and after a while she found herself saying something she hadn't planned to say. You didn't have to do that. Do what? Put Briggs in his place, in front of everyone. I can handle Briggs. I know you can, Walker said. That's exactly why I did it. A man who mouths off at somebody who can't fight back is just a bully. A man who mouths off at somebody who can flatten him and chooses not to, he shrugged. That's a man who's about to embarrass this whole base someday. I'd rather he learn now. Emily set down her fork. You've been watching me. Since you got off the truck. And, Walker leaned back, and your file's got a 3-year hole in it that somebody worked very hard to dig. You didn't flinch when Briggs threw your weapon in the dirt, which means you've had worse thrown at you than a sergeant's opinion. And you carry that rifle like it's the only thing in the world you actually trust. He paused. So here's my question, Carter. What is a soldier like you doing at a nowhere outpost in Montana? She didn't answer for a long moment. You always ask this many questions the first day, she said, only about people who scare me. That got a reaction. Just a flicker. She hadn't expected honesty from him. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Commander," she said quietly. "I'm here to do a job. When it's done, I'll be gone, and none of you will have to think about the girl with the junk rifle ever again." "See now that," Walker said, pointing his fork at her, "is the most words you've said all day, and every one of them was designed to tell me exactly nothing." He studied her. "What job?" "Excuse me. You said you came here to do a job. Red Valley doesn't have jobs, Carter. That's the whole point of Red Valley. Nothing happens here. So what job did somebody send you 2,000 miles to do?" Emily met his eyes and held them. "When I know for sure," she said, "you'll be the first to hear it." "That's not a no." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." Walker picked up his tray. "Get some rest, Carter. Range time tomorrow. I want to see this antique of yours in action." He walked off. Emily watched him go, and this time the thing that crossed her face wasn't annoyance. It was something more careful, something closer to worry. Because Commander James Walker had done in 10 minutes what most people never did at all. He had actually looked at her, and people who looked at her too closely had a way of getting hurt. She didn't sleep much that night. She lay on the cold cot by the window with the rifle beside her close enough to touch, and she listened to the base breathe around her 200 soldiers who had no idea. And she watched the mountains through the glass. Twice she thought she saw something. A shift in the dark that was blacker than the dark around it. A place on the ridge where the stars went out for a moment and came back. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was tired. That old ghost came out at night, that not every shadow was a man. But she had told herself that once before a long time ago, on another night, and she had been wrong, and 11 people had paid for her being wrong, and she had promised herself over a row of flag-draped boxes that she would never make that mistake again. So she watched the mountains until the sky went gray. The next morning, the whole base wanted to be at the range. Word had spread that the commander himself had ordered the new sniper to shoot, and Briggs had been talking all night about how he couldn't wait to watch the wheels come off. By the time Emily walked out to the firing line with the rifle over her shoulder, there were 40 soldiers standing around who had absolutely no reason to be there except to watch a woman fail. Briggs was front and center. All right, he announced. "Everybody quiet down. History's about to be made. First recorded shot fired from a rifle that predates electricity." Laughter. Emily ignored him. She walked to the line, knelt, and set up without a word. And the men who were paying attention noticed that she moved differently than Briggs did. There was no wasted motion. Every adjustment she made was small and exact and finished before you noticed it had started. She didn't fuss with the rifle. She didn't check it 3 times. She settled behind it like it was part of her body. "Targets are set at 300, the range officer called. "Standard qualification, 10 rounds center mass, take your time." Briggs snorted. 300. She'll need a taxi to get the round there." Emily lay still. She didn't fire. 10 seconds, 15, 20. The men started shifting, muttering. "What's she waiting for?" someone said. "Told you," Briggs said. "Slow." Walker, standing to the side with his arms crossed, said nothing. He was watching her hands. They were not moving. They were not shaking. She was breathing slow and even, and her eye was at the scope, and Walker realized she wasn't stalling. She was reading the wind. The first shot cracked across the range so suddenly that half the crowd jumped. The spotter at the scope went quiet. "Center," he said, "dead center." The second shot came almost on top of the first. Then the third. She wasn't taking her time. She was firing in a rhythm now, controlled and fast, the bolt cycling under her hand in one clean motion each time, and the spotter's voice climbed with every round. "Center, center, center. She's stacking them. Sir, they're all in the same center. Center." 10 shots. It took her under 90 seconds. When she stood up and looked down range, the paper target 300 yards out had a single ragged hole punched through the middle of it where 10 rounds had gone through nearly the same spot. The range went dead silent. Briggs wasn't laughing anymore. "Bring the target up," Walker said. The range officer ran it up the line, and when it reached them, nobody said anything for a second. The hole in the center of the paper was barely bigger than a fist. 10 rounds. 1 hole. "That's not possible," Briggs said. "With that rifle at 300, that's the glass on that thing is garbage. There's no way." "You want to check the barrel, Sergeant?" Emily asked. She held the rifle out to him, stock first. "Go ahead, tell me what's garbage about it." Briggs didn't take it. "Take the rifle, Brig." Walker said quietly. Briggs took it. He turned it over in his hands, looking for the trick, looking for the thermal, the high-end optic, the thing that explained it, and he found none of it because there was none of it. It was exactly what it looked like. An old bolt-action rifle, worn and scratched and repaired by hand a dozen times with a plain scope that any soldier on the base would have thrown away. I don't understand, Briggs said, and for the first time his voice was honest. No, Emily said, taking the rifle back. You don't. She slung it over her shoulder and walked off the line, and this time nobody laughed, and this time the silence that followed her had turned into something else entirely. It had turned into the specific, uneasy quiet of 40 men realizing at the same moment that they had spent a day and a half mocking somebody who was better at the one thing that mattered here than any of them would ever be. Hutchins found his voice first. That was the best shooting I've ever seen in my life, he said to nobody, to everybody. Did anybody else just see that? Nobody answered him. They'd seen it. Walker caught up to her at the edge of the range. Carter. She stopped. 300 yards, 10 rounds, 1 hole, he said. I've been on a lot of ranges. I've seen a lot of shooters. I have never seen that. He looked at her. That wasn't marksmanship. That was something else. Where does a person learn to shoot like that? Practice, Emily said. Don't. Commander. You could have qualified with any rifle on this base, Walker said. We've got optics that would put those rounds through the same hole for you and make you look like a genius. But you didn't want them. You brought that. He nodded at the rifle. Why? Emily was quiet for a long moment, and then for the first time she gave him something real. Because I know it, she said. Every rifle's got a personality, a pull adrift, a way it likes to sit. Takes months to learn one, years to trust one. Her hand moved to the long scratch in the stock, the one she'd touched in the barracks. This one I know like I know my own heartbeat. It's never lied to me. Not once. Not even when everything else did. She looked up at him. You can hand me a rifle worth $100,000, Commander, and I'll still take the one that came back with me. The words hung there. Came back with me. Walker didn't miss it. Neither of them acknowledged it. But he filed it away the way he filed away every small, true thing a careful person let slip. Because in his experience, the whole shape of a soldier could be read from the one word they didn't mean to say. There's a story in that rifle we share, Walker said. There's a story in every rifle, Commander. Most of them you don't want to hear. Try me. Emily looked at him for a long moment, and for just a second, Walker thought she might actually tell him. Then her jaw set and the door in her eyes swung shut, and whatever she'd been about to say went back down to wherever she kept it. Another time, she said. She was about to walk on when her head turned. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking past him, past the range out toward the mountains that ring the base, and her whole posture had changed in an instant, gone from tired to something sharp and still and awake. Carter. Quiet, she said. What is it? There's movement on the north ridge. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. 2, maybe 3 positions. Hi, watching us. Walker turned and looked. The north ridge was over a mile away, a long gray spine of rock and scrub, trees, and it looked exactly the way it always looked. Empty. I don't see anything, he said. You wouldn't. They're good. Emily's eyes moved slowly along the ridgeline, and she wasn't looking at the ridge exactly. She was looking at the little wrong things. A patch of scrub where the shadow fell at the wrong angle. A place where the birds weren't landing. A stone that had a faint line of disturbed earth beneath it that hadn't been there in the satellite maps she'd studied on the drive up. See that outcrop second from the left? The dark one? There was a bird on it 20 minutes ago. It's not there now. Nothing's landed since. Something up there's keeping them off. Could be a fox, a cat. Could be, Emily agreed, but a fox doesn't lie still for 20 minutes staring at a firing range. She lowered her voice further. And a fox doesn't reflect. Reflect. There was a flash off the second position. Small. A watch, a lens, a buckle. Somebody up there moved and caught the sun. She finally turned to look at Walker, and her face was completely serious now. Commander, you've got eyes on your base, right now, and they've been there long enough to learn your routine. Walker stared at the ridge. He still couldn't see a thing. But he had watched this woman put 10 rounds through one hole with a rifle everybody called junk, and something in his gut told him that if Emily Carter said there were men on that ridge, there were men on that ridge. How long, he asked. How long what? How long have they been watching us? Emily's eyes went back to the mountain. Longer than a day, she said quietly. They knew exactly when the range would be full. They knew everyone would be out here watching me shoot. Nobody's manning the east wall right now, or them, Commander. Walker's blood went cold. He turned. The east wall on the far side of the compound was empty. Every soldier who should have been posted there was standing at the range watching the show. Watching her. They used you, Emily said. The whole base came to watch the new girl, and while everybody was looking here, she nodded once at the ridge. Somebody up there was counting exactly how many of us weren't looking there. Get to the wall, Walker said, but he was already moving, already shouting it. Grant, get a squad on the east wall. Now, move. The range dissolved into motion, soldiers scrambling, the easy laughter of 10 minutes ago gone like it had never existed. Briggs stood frozen still, holding nothing, watching the new sniper he'd humiliated calmly track something on a mountain that none of the rest of them could even see. Emily hadn't moved. She stood at the edge of the range with the rifle on her shoulder and her eyes on the ridge, and Walker running past caught one glimpse of her face. She wasn't afraid. She looked like someone who had seen this before, who had felt this exact cold certainty settle into her stomach on some other day in some other place, and had learned what it meant and what it cost. Carter, Walker called back. You coming? In a minute, Emily said, not moving, not looking away from the mountain. I want to see what they do now that they know we saw them. How do you know they know we saw them? Emily's thumb settled against the long scratch in the stock of the old rifle, the one that ran from the grip nearly to the top, and when she answered, her voice was so low that Walker barely caught it over the noise of his scrambling men. Because the flash just stopped, she said. All three positions. At the same second. Nobody does that by accident. She finally turned and looked at him, and there was something in her eyes now that hadn't been there before, something old and hard and grieving and all at once. They're not scouts, Commander. Scouts run when they're spotted. These men went still. They're disciplined. They're patient. And there's only one kind of enemy that trains a man to hold that still when he knows he's been seen. She looked back at the mountain, the kind that isn't afraid of dying. Walker stared at her. The wind moved across the range and lifted the dust, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You fought these people before, he said. It wasn't a question. Emily didn't answer right away. I fought somebody who trains people like that, she said finally. A long time ago, on the other side of the world. I put him and everything he built in the ground. Her jaw tightened. At least that's what they told me. That's what the report said. Threat neutralized. Case closed. Go home, Carter. It's over. And now there are 3 ghost positions on your North Ridge holding a discipline I've only ever seen one man teach. She was quiet a moment. So either I've got a very long memory and a very tired imagination, Commander. She slung the rifle tighter across her back. Or somebody lied to me about a grave. Walker felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Carter, what exactly did they send you here to do? Emily started walking toward the command building fast now. All the tiredness burned off her, and she answered him without turning around, and her voice was flat and certain and cold as the wind off the mountains. They didn't send me to do anything, she said. I requested this posting. I've been requesting it for 8 months, ever since a satellite caught a face on a ridgeline in Montana that was supposed to be dead. She stopped at the door and looked back at him. Nothing ever happens at Red Valley, Commander. That's what your private told me last night. A thin, humorless line crossed her mouth. I'm afraid that's about to change. And somewhere on the North Ridge, more than a mile away, behind the dark outcrop where a bird had refused to land for 20 minutes, a man Emily Carter had spent 3 years believing was dead lowered. A spotting scope studied the small figure standing alone at the edge of the range and went very, very still. Because he had seen that rifle before. He had seen that scratch in the stock and before the day he put it there himself. And he knew the way you know your own name exactly who was holding it. Hello, Emily, he said softly to no one to the wind. I wondered how long it would take you. Then he folded the scope, sank back into the rock, and began very patiently to wait. Walker didn't ask her to explain the grave. There wasn't time, and something in the way she'd said it told him that if he pushed now, she'd shut all the way down and he needed her open. War room, he said. Now, both of us. Inside, Grant already had the base map up on the screen, And Emily walked straight to it without being invited, planted a finger on the north ridge, and drew a slow line down toward the compound. 3 positions here, here, and here, she said, but those aren't the ones that matter. Those are the ones they let me see. Walker frowned. Let you see. A good sniper doesn't get spotted, Commander. Not by a bird, not by a reflection, not by anything. I've held a hide for 2 days without moving a muscle. These men could too. She tapped the map. So if I caught 3 of them, it's because somebody decided I should. They wanted to know if the new arrival could see them. They wanted to test me. Grant looked up. And you passed. No, Emily said quietly. I failed. Passing would have been walking off that range like I saw nothing. Now they know I'm the one thing on this base they have to plan around. The room went still. Briggs had followed them in uninvited, and he stood by the door with his arms crossed, and the smirk he'd worn for a day and a half was gone, but he wasn't ready to give up all of it yet. This is insane, he said. One good day on the range, and now she's telling us there's a whole enemy army in the hills. We haven't had so much as a trespasser in 4 years. Emily didn't even turn around. How's your east wall, Sergeant? Grant's radio crackled before Briggs could answer. The squad on the east wall reported in, and the young voice on the other end was tight. Command, we've got sir. There's fresh boot prints in the drainage ditch outside the wire. Multiple sets, and a cut in the fence low near the ground patched back so you wouldn't see it unless you were looking. Walker keyed the radio. How old? Hard to say, sir, but the patch is clean. Somebody's been in and out of here. Recently. Briggs's arms came uncrossed. Emily finally turned and looked at him, and there was nothing cruel in her face, no gloating, just a kind of tired steadiness that was somehow worse. They've been walking through your wire while you slept, Sergeant, for days, maybe weeks. And the only reason you're finding out now is because I made them move early. She turned back to the map. You're welcome. Walker studied her. Why early? What did we change? Me, Emily said. They had a timeline, something they were building toward, nice and slow, no rush. And then a satellite somewhere flagged the wrong face, and the wrong girl started filing transfer requests, and the man running this operation had to make a decision. Her jaw tightened. Wait and risk me finding him, or move up the whole plan and hit you before I'm ready. She looked at Walker. He moved it up, which tells me 2 things. He's here, and he's afraid of me. Should he be? Walker asked. Emily was quiet for a moment. Once, she said. He should have been afraid of me once. I don't know what's left of that woman anymore. Walker let that sit. Then he did the thing that made him a good commander, the thing Briggs would never have understood. He didn't demand proof. He didn't stand on rank. He looked at the soldier in front of him, who clearly knew more about this enemy than anyone alive, and he made a choice. Grant full alert, quietly. I don't want sirens. I don't want a panic. I want every man armed and awake, and I want it to look like a normal day from the outside. He turned to Emily. You're not a line sniper anymore. As of right now, you're my eyes. Whatever you need. Briggs made a sound. Sir, you can't seriously be putting the new... I can, Sergeant, and if you say one more word, I'm going to start wondering out loud why my east wall was empty this morning. Walker's voice never rose. Now go find out where those boot prints lead. Take Ruiz. Report to me and only me. Briggs went. He didn't like it, but he went, and that was something. When the door closed, Walker turned to Emily and lowered his voice. The grave, he said. You said somebody lied to you about a grave. I need the rest of it. Not for curiosity. If I'm going to bet my base on your read of this man, I have to know who he is to you. Emily didn't answer right away. She walked to the window and she looked out at the mountains, and Walker had the sense that she was deciding something she'd been putting off for 3 years. His name is Marcus Vale, she said finally. At least that's the name I knew him by. He was one of ours once, American. Special Operations, Black Side, the kind of unit that doesn't have a name and doesn't show up in any file you'll ever be allowed to read. She paused. He was my team leader. Walker went very still. 11 of us, Emily said. Best unit I ever served with. We ran missions nobody else could in places nobody would admit we'd been. Vale trained me. He gave me that rifle. He put the scratch in the stock himself. The first week dropped it climbing a wall and felt so guilty he tried to give me a new one, and I wouldn't take it. Her voice was steady, but it was steady the way a hand is steady when someone is forcing it to be. I told him the scratch made it mine. He laughed. He said, "Then it's yours, Carter scratch and all." I was 23. What happened? Emily's thumb found the scratch the way it always did. There was a mission. Deep, bad intel, we were told. An ambush waiting for us that shouldn't have been there. She stopped. 11 of us went in. 2 came out. Me and Vale. Walker waited. For 2 years, I mourned 9 people, Emily said. I stood at 9 funerals. I wrote 9 letters. I carried 9 names, and I carried the one thing that let me get up in the morning, which was that at least Vale and I had made it. At least somebody who understood what we lost was still breathing. Her voice dropped. And then 8 months ago, a satellite flagged a face on a ridgeline, and I ran it. Off the books because they'd have stopped me, and it was him. She turned from the window. The intel that got my team killed didn't come from bad luck, Commander. It came from inside. The ambush knew our route because somebody told them our route, and the only 2 people who could have was the 2 people who walked out alive. Walker's stomach turned over. You think, I didn't want to think anything, Emily said sharply. For 8 months, I told myself there had to be another answer. That he'd been captured, turned under torture. That he wasn't the one. I ran every scenario where Marcus Vale was still the man who put a scratch in my rifle and called me his best shooter. She shook her head slowly. But he's not captured. He's not being held. He's up on that ridge running a disciplined unit against an American base. And every instinct I have is screaming that the man who sold out 9 of the best people I ever knew is about to try to do it again. And this time I'm the only one who can see him coming. The silence in the war room was total. Then it's not the base he wants, Walker said slowly, working it through. Not really. No, Emily said. The base is the mission. His employers, whoever they are, want your comms, your position, your dead ground for whatever comes next. That's the job. She looked at him. But me, I'm the loose thread. I'm the one person alive who knows what he did. He can't finish anything with me walking around. So he's got 2 problems to solve, and he's going to try to solve them both at once. Take the base and bury the last witness, Emily finished. Me. Walker exhaled slowly. Then he did the math no commander ever wants to do. He had 200 soldiers, most of whom had never been shot at, a base built for boredom, and an enemy that had apparently been walking through his wire for weeks, led by a traitor who used to be one of America's best. And he had exactly one asset that mattered, and she was standing in front of him with a rifle everyone had laughed at. What do you need, he said. Time, Emily said, and for you to trust me, even when what I tell you sounds insane. She moved back to the map. First thing, your radios are compromised. We swept them last month. He doesn't need to break your encryption. He needs to know your habits. When you check in, who checks in, what a normal traffic day sounds like. If he's been listening for weeks, he can hear the difference between a quiet base and a base that just went to full alert, no matter how quiet you think you're being. She pointed at Grant. Every scheduled check-in happens exactly on time, exactly like always. Same voices, same bored tone. If Grant here suddenly sounds tense, Vale will know we know, and he'll move tonight instead of when I want him to. Grant swallowed. When do you want him to? When I'm ready, Emily said, not before. For the next hour, she walked the base with Walker, and she saw it. The way Vale would see it, which was the most useful and the most horrible thing about her. She stood where the east wall guards should have stood and showed Walker the Iraq firing lane from the ridge that the empty post had opened up. She found the low spot in the terrain where a man could crawl from the drainage ditch to the motor pool without ever showing his head. She stopped at the communications building, looked at it a long moment, Martin said, "That's the target. That's what this whole thing is for. Everything else is theater to keep you looking the wrong way." And Walker felt the truth of it land in his chest. "There's something I don't understand," Walker said as they walked. "If he's as good as you say, why walk into a base at all? Why not stand off on that ridge and let his men do the work?" "Because his men can't do this part," Emily said. "Taking a comms building intact, pulling the right data off it, doing it clean, that's not a shooter's job. That's a technician's job with a shooter's timing. He doesn't trust it to anyone else." She stopped walking. "And because of me, he could send 20 men through that wire and never come down off the ridge, and he'd probably win. But then he'd spend the rest of his life knowing I was still out here. Men like Vale don't leave loose threads. It's the thing that made him the best team leader I ever had. It's the thing that's going to bring him down that mountain tonight. She looked at Walker. His greatest strength is that he finishes what he starts. I'm going to use it to kill him. Walker studied her face. You keep saying kill, like it's already decided. But this is a man who trained you, who you mourned. Are you sure when he's in your crosshairs that you'll be able to? No, Emily said. I'm not sure. That's the honest answer, Commander, and it's the thing that scares me more than anything up on that ridge. She started walking again. So let's just make sure I don't have to find out at the wrong second. By afternoon, roughly 2 hours since the range, Briggs came back, and he was a different man than the one who'd left. Whatever he'd found in that drainage ditch had knocked the last of the swagger out of him. It's not one entry point, he said, and his voice was low. It's four. 4 separate cuts in the wire, all patched, all recent. They come from 4 directions. And there's a packet, ma'am. He set a canvas bundle on the table and unwrapped it, and inside were ration packets, water, and a single spare magazine. Buried near the north cut, foreign markings. This isn't scouts, sir. This is a unit that's been pre-positioning supplies for a sustained operation. They're planning to be inside our wire and stay there. Walker looked at Emily. Emily was looking at the magazine. She picked it up, turned it over, read the markings, and something moved across her face. What? Walker said. This is his, she said quietly. Not the country of origin. Him. Vale always overloaded by 1 round past the safe seat. Everybody said it'd jam. He never let anybody talk him out of it. Said 1 extra round was 1 extra life someday. She set the magazine down carefully. He's not just directing this from the ridge. He's coming inside with them. He's going to be here on the ground in your base. Briggs stared at her. How can you possibly know that from a... Because I loaded 1,000 magazines exactly like that one standing next to him, Emily said. Because he taught me to do it. Because for 3 years I thought the man who taught me was dead, and now I'm holding a magazine he loaded with his own hands, and I know it the way you'd know your own brother's handwriting. She looked up. He wants to be here. He wants to do it himself, which means somewhere in that man, there's still enough of the soldier I knew to think he owes me a face-to-face. Her voice hardened. Good, because I owe him one too. Briggs sat down slowly. When he spoke again, the arrogance was gone, entirely replaced by something that looked almost like shame. I threw your rifle in the dirt, he said. Yeah, Emily said, you did. I'm sorry. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Don't be sorry, Sergeant. Be useful. There's a difference, and about 199 people on this base are going to need you to know it before tonight's over. Something passed between them then, not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of respect, the kind that only gets built when a man finally understands how wrong he was and decides to do something about it instead of drowning in it. All right, Briggs said, standing back up. Then tell me what to do. You're the one who can see them. I can't, so you point and I'll put men where you say. He swallowed. Never thought I'd hear myself say that to somebody I met yesterday. But I've been wrong about a lot of things in one day. Might as well be wrong about the rest of my pride, too. For the first time, something in Emily's face eased. That's the smartest thing anybody said to me since I got off that truck. She pulled the map toward them both. Here's what I need from you. As the afternoon wore on toward evening, roughly 5 hours since the range, the base moved through its fake normal routine and Emily worked. She chose her hide, not the obvious tower, not the wall, but a maintenance loft above the motor pool with a sight line across half the compound and a clear view of the communications building. She ranged distances by eye and confirmed them, memorizing the numbers, building the whole battlefield inside her head so that when the dark came and the shooting started, she wouldn't have to think, she'd only have to act. Hutchins found her there as the light was going. They're saying you called it, he said. The whole thing. Everybody's talking about it. This morning, half of them were laughing at you, and now they're... He stopped. They're scared, ma'am, and they're kind of hoping you're not. Emily didn't look up from the rifle she was checking. I'm plenty scared, Hutchins. You don't look it. That's the job. You feel it all the way down, and you don't let it into your hands. She worked the bolt, checked it, closed it. Fear's not the enemy. Fear keeps you sharp. The enemy is panic, and panic comes from surprise, and we're not going to be surprised, not tonight. She glanced at Edom. You scared? Yes, ma'am, real bad. Good. Stay that way. The day you stop being scared out here is the day you get somebody killed. She softened just slightly. Where are you from, Hutchins? Ohio, ma'am. Little town nobody's heard of. Somebody's heard of it. Somebody back home's got your picture on a mantle and says your name every night. She met his eyes. You're going to see them again. You understand me? That's not a hope. That's an order. You survive tonight and you go home to Ohio. The kid's throat worked. Yes, ma'am. Now get to your post. And Hutchins, when it starts, whatever you hear, you hold your position and you trust the people around you. Nobody wins this alone. He went. Emily watched him go, and for just a second the mask slipped, and Walker, climbing the ladder into the loft, saw it. He saw the grief she carried, the 9 names, and he understood that she was looking at that 19-year-old kid from Ohio and seeing everyone she hadn't been able to save. He'll be all right, Walker said. Don't say that. Emily's voice was flat. Don't ever say that. The last time somebody promised me a mission would be all right, I buried 9 people. She turned back to her rifle. We don't promise, we prepare. There's a difference. Walker climbed the rest of the way in and crouched beside her. Full dark was maybe an hour off now. The base had gone quiet in the way bases do at dusk, and out beyond the wire the mountains had turned from gray to black. Can I ask you something? Walker said. Off the record. Just 2 soldiers. You can ask. When this is over, when Vale's dead and the base is safe and the sun comes up, what then? Where does a woman go who's spent 3 years chasing a ghost the day the ghost is finally gone? Emily was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she admitted. I never let myself think past tonight. 8 months and every plan I made ended with him in the ground. There's nothing after that. I never built anything after that. She looked at her hands. Maybe that's the real thing he took from me. Not just those 9 people. A future. He took the version of me that got to have one. Then take it back, Walker said quietly. That's the only revenge that ever means anything. You don't just end him, you outlive him. You go build the thing he tried to steal. Emily looked at him, and for a moment something passed across her face that wasn't grief and wasn't cold. Something younger. Something that hadn't been let out in 3 years. You're a strange kind of commander, James Walker, she said. I've been told. Below them, the base radio traffic murmured its normal boring rhythm, and the last light drained out of the sky, and somewhere on the North Ridge, Marcus Vale looked down at Fort Red Valley and gave the order to move. They'll come tonight, Emily said, and the softness was gone from her voice now, folded away where she kept it. First real dark. He moved his timeline up because of me, but he won't wait now that he knows I've seen his men. Every hour he waits, I get more ready. He knows that. So he comes tonight early, hard, and he leads with something loud on the far side to pull everyone away from the comms building. She pointed across the compound. That's the whole game. When the shooting starts on one side, the fight is always on the other. Whatever screams for your attention is the thing you're supposed to ignore. Walker keyed his radio, gave a routine board-sounding check-in exactly on schedule, exactly like always, and clicked off. How do you do this? He said quietly. Sit here, knowing he's out there, the man who knowing what he did. Emily was quiet for a long moment. For 8 months, I thought this would feel like something, she said. Rage, maybe, or grief. I thought when I finally had him in front of me, I'd feel the whole weight of those 9 people come down at once. She looked out at the dark mountains. But you know what I feel, Commander, cold. Just cold. Like a part of me already died on that mission 3 years ago. And it's the dead part that came all the way to Montana to finish this. She checked her ammunition one final time. Vale used to say the best snipers are already a little bit dead. That's why we can be so still. The living can't hold that quiet. Only the dead can wait forever. Her mouth twisted. I used to think he was being dramatic. Now I think he was warning me what this job would turn me into. Walker didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure there was one. So he did the only thing he could think of. He put a hand on her shoulder just for a second, the way you'd steady a soldier before they went over the wall, and then he took it back. Whatever you were before this, he said, it's still in there. I've watched you look at that Ohio kid all afternoon. Dead people don't do that. He picked up his own weapon. Now let's go save my base. The first sign was the dogs. The base kept 2 mutts the soldiers had adopted, and they started barking at the north wire low and frantic. And then they stopped all at once, and the silence after was worse than the barking. Emily's head came up. "That's it," she said. "That's him, north side." Her voice went hard and clear. "Commander, get on your radio. Tell everyone to hold their positions, no matter what happens on the north wall. No matter what. The north is the theater. The play is somewhere else." Walker keyed the radio, and that was the exact moment the north wall erupted. Gunfire tore across the compound, muzzle flashes stitching the dark. And it was loud, deliberately loud. A wall of noise designed to grab every eye and every gun on the base and drag them north. Men shouted. Someone screamed. The instinct to run toward the sound, to face the thing that was firing, was overwhelming, and Walker felt it in his own body, the animal pull to turn and fight the noise. "Hold," Emily said, low, steady, not moving. "Hold. Let it burn. It's not real. People are shooting at my wall. They're shooting at your wall to make you look at your wall." Emily hadn't moved her eye from the scope, and she wasn't pointed north. She was pointed at the communications building, dark and quiet on the south side, the thing everyone was now turning their backs on. "Come on," she breathed to the dark, to the man she'd buried in her mind 3 years ago. "Come on, Marcus. I know how you think. You taught me how you think. Show me." 10 seconds. 20, and the gunfire raged on the north wall. Walker's radio lit up with panicked voices, men begging to reinforce the north, and it took everything he had to keep his own voice bored and flat and tell them to hold your positions. His hands were shaking. Emily's were not. And then on the south side, in the deep shadow beside the communications building, a piece of the dark peeled away from the rest of the dark and moved. Emily saw it. One man, then two, then a low line of them flowing out of the drainage ditch exactly where she'd told Walker they would, crossing the dead ground toward the comms building, while every soldier on the base faced the wrong way. "There you are," Emily whispered. She settled behind the rifle everyone had laughed at, the one Marcus Vale had given her, the one with his scratch in the stock, and for one terrible heartbeat, her finger rested on the trigger and did not move, because somewhere in that line of shadows crossing toward the heart of the base was the man who had trained her and given her this weapon and betrayed 9 people she loved, and she had spent 3 years not knowing whether she could do this, whether she could actually put the crosshairs on Marcus Vale and pull. Down in the dark, the lead figure stopped. He stopped, and he turned his head, and even at that distance, even through the scope, even after 3 years, Emily knew the shape of him, knew the way he tilted his head when he was listening, and she understood in that frozen half-second that Marcus Vale had stopped because Marcus Vale had felt her looking the way he'd taught her to feel it, and he was staring back up into the dark toward the one hide on the whole base where he knew she would be waiting. For one long breath, across 200 yards of darkness in 3 years of grief, the teacher and the student looked at each other through the noise and the muzzle flash and the whole burning theater of the north wall. And Emily Carter let out half a breath, held the rest, and took up the last ounce of slack on the trigger of the junk rifle. She didn't fire at him. At the last half second, Emily shifted the crosshairs off Marcus Vale and put them on the man beside him, the one carrying the breaching charge, and she pulled, and the junk rifle spoke once across the dark compound, and the man with the charge dropped where he stood and did not move again. The line of shadows froze. Then it scattered, and the whole quiet plan came apart in a single second, because the thing that made an infiltration work was that nobody knew it was happening, and now somebody did. "Comms building south side," Emily said, calm, flat, already working the bolt. "That's the real attack. Move your people, Commander, now." Walker was already on the radio, and this time his voice wasn't bored anymore. It was iron. "All units. The north wall is a feint. Say again, north is a feint. Real assault is on the comms building south side. Converge and converge now. Down below, chaos. But it was the good kind now. The kind that came from men finally being pointed at the right threat instead of the wrong one. Soldiers who'd been straining to hold their positions against every instinct turned as one and poured toward the south, and the shadows crossing the dead ground found themselves caught in the open with nowhere left to hide. Emily worked. She wasn't rushing. That was the thing Walker would remember for the rest of his life, watching her in that loft. The whole world had gone loud and fast and frightened, and Emily Carter had gone slow. One breath, one shot, one man down. Bolt back, bolt forward, Find the next threat. One breath, one shot. She was picking apart an elite unit in the dark with a rifle that any soldier on the base would have thrown in a scrap heap. And she was doing it with the terrible, unhurried patience of someone who had done this before in worse places than this. Two more in the ditch, she said. Briggs, you copy. Briggs's voice came back over the radio, tight but steady. Copy. I've got the ditch. I've got it. And then the sound of his squad opening up and the two men in the ditch stopped being a problem. Nice work, Sergeant, Emily said. Keep that flank sealed. Don't let anybody circle behind you. Copy that. A pause and then quieter, almost embarrassed, even in the middle of a firefight. For what it's worth, Carter, you called every bit of this. Every bit. Save it, Emily said, not unkindly. Buy me a coffee when we're all still breathing in the morning. But Vale was not in the open anymore. Emily had lost him the instant she'd fired the way she'd known she would, because Vale had felt the shot coming and moved before the man beside him even fell, and now he was somewhere in the dark maze of the comms building's shadow, and she couldn't find him. She scanned. Nothing. He'd gone to ground exactly the way she would have, exactly the way he'd taught her to. Talk to me, Walker said. Where is he? Inside my blind spot, Emily said, and there was something almost like respect in her voice, and she hated it. He knows where my hide is. He clocked it the second he stopped. So he's moving through the one lane I can't cover. He's still going for the comms building. He hasn't quit. He'll never quit. She pulled back from the scope. Commander, I have to move. If I stay here, he walks right into that building under my nose, and I can't do a thing about it. Move where? Down to him. Walker grabbed her arm. Carter, that's exactly what he wants. He didn't come down that mountain to fight your rifle. He came to get you off that ridge and into a room where the rifle doesn't matter, and it's just the two of you. You said it yourself. You're the loose thread. Don't hand him the scissors. Emily stopped. Because he was right, and she knew he was right, and knowing it didn't change the fact that every second she stayed up here, Marcus Vale got closer to the one thing his whole employer's plan hinged on. You don't understand, she said. For 3 years, I've imagined every version of this except the one where I do the smart thing and let him win because I was scared to be brave. She shook her head. But you're not wrong. So we do it halfway. I go down, but I don't go alone, and I don't go stupid. Then give me another gun, she said. Somebody who can hold this loft and this sight line while I go. Somebody I can trust. Hutchins, Walker said, he's the best shot on the base after you. Green but steady. Get him up here. 90 seconds later, timeline, maybe 15 minutes into the assault, Hutchins came up the ladder, white-faced and breathing hard, and Emily grabbed him by the vest and put her face close to his. You listen to me. I'm not asking you to be me. I'm asking you to be a wall. Anybody comes across that dead ground toward the comms building, you put them down. You don't think about it. You don't hesitate. You don't wonder if they've got a family in Ohio. You already know they came here to kill everybody you've got in Ohio. You understand? Yes, ma'am. His voice shook. What about you? I'm going to go do the thing I came 2,000 miles to do. She pressed the old rifle into his hands. Take it. Hutchins stared at it. Ma'am, this is yours. This is everybody knows what this rifle means to you. I can't. That's exactly why you can, Emily said. I'm trusting you with the most important thing I own. Now hold this loft and don't you dare miss. She was already at the ladder. Then she stopped and turned back, and for 1 second she wasn't a sniper or a ghost or a loose thread. She was just a woman who had learned the hard way what it cost to leave people behind. Hutchins, you survived tonight. That's still in order. Ma'am. He swallowed hard and then he found something, some spine he hadn't known he had, and his hands stopped shaking as they closed around the rifle. This dead ground's a wall. Nothing's crossing it. You have my word. That's the first time you didn't sound scared, Emily said. I'm still scared, Hutchins said. I just decided it doesn't get to drive. Something flickered across her face, something proud and sad all at once. Now you sound like a soldier. And she was gone down the ladder before he could answer. Walker went with her because there was no version of this where he let her go alone, and they moved through the compound low and fast, and everywhere around them, the base was fighting for its life. The north wall feint had collapsed once the men stopped falling for it, but Vale's people were disciplined, even in defeat, peeling back, covering each other, making the army pay for every yard. This was not a mob. This was a professional unit doing exactly what it was trained to do. And the only reason Fort Red Valley wasn't already lost was that a woman with an old rifle had read the whole plan an hour before it started. How many did he bring? Walker said as they ran. 12, maybe 14, Emily said. You've killed or pinned most of them. That's the good news. What's the bad news? The ones left are the ones he trusts most, and they're between us and that building. They rounded the motor pool, and there they were, 3 of them, holding the approach to the comms building in a tight professional wedge. And the instant Emily and Walker showed themselves, the night lit up with muzzle flash, and they threw themselves behind cover as rounds hammered the metal around them. Pinned, Walker breathed. For now. Emily had her sidearm out, and her mind was already 3 moves ahead, running the geometry, the angles, the way she always did. They're good, but they're set up to hold a line, not to fight in 2 directions. If somebody hits them from the flank while we press from here, they fold. There's nobody on the flank. There will be, Emily keyed her radio. Briggs, you clear the ditch. Ditch is clear? Briggs came back. Where do you need me? She told him. Fast, precise, exact. And 30 seconds later, timeline, maybe 18 minutes, in Sergeant Dale Briggs, and 4 men came out of the dark on the enemy's flank and hit them from the side. They weren't set up to defend, and the tight professional wedge that had them pinned came apart in 10 seconds of hard, close fighting. Then it was quiet, at least right there in that one corner of the battle. 2 of the 3 enemy were down. The third had thrown his weapon away and put his hands on his head, and Briggs's men had him on the ground. That's the last of them out here, Briggs said, coming up beside Walker, breathing hard, and he looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't quite read. Carter, that's the whole approach cleared. Whatever's left is inside that building, and it's not many. He wiped sweat and grime off his face. I owe you an apology I can't even fit into words. So I'll just say this. Whatever you need, whatever comes next, I'm your man. Me and every soldier out here. You point, we go. Emily looked at him, and for a second the hardness in her face gave way to something almost gentle. Yesterday you threw my rifle in the dirt. Yesterday I was an idiot who'd never been shot at, Briggs said. Turns out getting shot at makes you rethink some things real fast. It does that, Emily agreed. And then because there was no more time, hold this position. Nobody in or out of that building but me. If it goes bad in there, she glanced at Walker, the commander will tell you what to do. She was already moving toward the comms building, and Walker grabbed her again. Wait. If he's the last one, if it's just him now, you don't go in there alone. That's the whole trap. That's what this entire night was for. I know, Emily said. Then why are you walking toward it? She looked at him, and in the dim glow of the burning night, her face was very calm and very tired. Because he's not going to hurt anybody else while I'm standing outside being smart commander. He came for the comms, and he came for me, and the only way this ends tonight is if he gets one of those things. I'd rather it be me on my terms than that building on his. She checked her sidearm. Give me 2 minutes. If I'm not out in 2 minutes, you come in hard and you don't wait for me. Carter. 2 minutes, James. It was the first time she'd used his name. He held her eyes for one long second, and then he nodded because he understood something in that moment that he'd only half understood before, which was that this had never really been about the base for her, that Fort Red Valley was just the ground where a 3-year-old wound had finally caught up with the woman carrying it. 2 minutes, he said. Then I'm coming through that door, and God help whatever's inside. She went in. Inside the comms building, it was dark and close, and full of the hum of the equipment that ran the whole base, and Emily moved through it the way she'd been trained, the way he'd trained her, and the terrible symmetry of it wasn't lost on her that she was hunting the man who'd taught her to hunt, using every lesson he'd ever given her in the dark alone. Her heart was slamming against her ribs, and she made it slow. She made it slow the way he'd taught her, because a fast heart made a shaking hand, and a shaking hand missed the shot that mattered. You didn't take the shot, a voice said from the dark, calm, warm even, a voice she'd heard in her dreams for 3 years. Out there, on the ridge, you had me, center of the crosshairs, and you put it on Reyes instead. A pause. You always did flinch on the ones that mattered, Carter. I didn't flinch, Marcus, Emily said, tracking the voice moving. I made a choice. Reyes had the breaching charge. You didn't. I take out the tool, the plan dies, and I still get to talk to the man. Her back was to a bank of equipment now, and she'd stopped moving because he'd stopped moving. That's what you taught me. Kill the mission first. The man can wait. A low laugh in the dark. God, I trained you well. Yeah, Emily said. You did, right up until you sold us. The silence that followed was different than the silences before. Heavier. Is that what you think happened? Vale said finally. That's what I know happened. 11 went in, 2 came out. The ambush had our route. Nobody outside the team had our route. That leaves you and me, and I know it wasn't me. Her voice cracked for the first time just slightly, and she hated it. Hated that after everything he could still do that to her. 9 people, Marcus. I wrote 9 letters. I stood at 9 graves. And you were up on a ridge in Montana this whole time drawing a paycheck from whoever's paying for tonight. You want to hear it was me, Vale said softly. You've built your whole life around it being me. 8 months of transfer requests all so you could stand in a dark room and finally put it on the man who ruined you. A pause, Boaz. But you never once asked yourself the real question, Emily. The only question that matters. And what's that? If I sold the team, Vale said, why am I the one who spent 3 years running from the same people who bought the intel? Emily went still. You think I work for them, Vale said, and his voice was moving now, circling, and she tracked it, and something in it had changed some exhaustion underneath the calm that she hadn't let herself hear until now. You think I'm the traitor. You've been so sure. You built a whole grave for me in your head, and you've been so certain you're the good one coming to dig it up. A breath. The intel didn't come from you, Carter. You're right about that. And it didn't come from me. It came from above us. It came from the man who signed our orders and sold our route the same afternoon. And when I figured that out, when I brought it to the people who were supposed to care, they told me the same thing they'd tell you if you were dumb enough to try. Threat neutralized. Case closed. Go home, soldier. You're lying. Am I? Then who's paying the men who died on your dead ground tonight, Emily? Who sent a whole professional unit 2,000 miles to take 1-0 comms building? In Montana? Who knew this base's every routine, its every weakness, the exact day a girl with a satellite hit and a grudge would file the transfer that flushed the whole thing early? His voice dropped, and it came from close now. Very close. Think Carter. You were always the smartest one on the team when you let yourself be one. Who benefits from you dying tonight in a firefight labeled a hero, buried with honors, mouth finally shut? Who benefits from me dying with you, the last 2 people alive who know what really happened on that mission? Stop. I didn't come here to take this base, Vale said. I came here to stop them from taking it. I came because I knew you'd come. And I knew if you came alone and angry and certain you'd walk right into the same trap they set for our whole team 3 years ago. A pause. The same trap you just walked into now. And that was when Emily understood 1 full second too late that the 3 men Briggs had cut down at the flank had not been the last of Vale's people. That the whole approach to the comms building, the pinning fire, the professional wedge had been designed not to keep her out but to funnel her in. That she had done exactly what she'd sworn she'd never do again. Walked into a room on someone else's terms because grief had made her certain and certainty had made her blind. No, she whispered, and it wasn't to him. It was to herself. It was to 9 graves. It was to the sick dawning weight of 3 years spent hunting the wrong man. No, if it wasn't you, then I came here to kill you, Marcus. I've spent 3 years. I know, Vale said. And his voice was gentle now, the way it had been the day he handed her a rifle and told her the scratch made it hers. I know exactly what you've spent. I've watched you spend it, and I let you keep coming because it was the only way to draw them out. I'm sorry, Emily. Of everything I've done, using your grief to bait a trap is the one I'll answer for. A red dot bloomed on the wall beside her head. It hadn't come from Vale. Down, Vale roared, and he hit her all his weight, driving her to the floor as the dark erupted, and the man Emily had spent 3 years planning to kill covered her body with his own, as rounds tore through the space where she'd been standing, fired by the men who'd been waiting in the comms building. The whole time the men she'd walked in to find the real trap. One Vale had come down a mountain and across 3 years of running to pull her out of. 2 of them. Vale gasped in her ear, far corner. They're the ones who bought our team. You understand me now. You understand. and Emily, flat on the floor with the weight of a man she'd mourned pressing her down and the whole world coming apart in muzzle flash above them, felt 3 years of certainty crack straight down the middle. Marcus. Later, he said, if there is a later. Right now there's 2 shooters and 1 door and about 40 seconds before your commander comes through it into their guns. He pressed his sidearm into her hand, his not hers, the weight of it, strange and familiar all at once. You always were the better shot, so be the better shot. Both corners. You've got maybe 2 rounds before they range us. His voice was the voice from the training range from 100 lifetimes ago, calm and sure, and hers. Breathe out, hold, and don't you dare flinch on the ones that matter. If I do this, Emily breathed, if we live, you tell me everything. Names. The man who signed the orders. All of it. 9 graves, Marcus. I'm not carrying them 1 more day for nothing. Everything, Vale promised. Every name. I swear it on the 9. Now shoot. Emily breathed out. She held. And in the dark of the comms building, with the truth of the last 3 years still ringing in her ears, and the man she'd come to kill lying over her to keep her alive, Carter came up on one elbow and put the crosshairs of her whole ruined life on the 2 shadows in the far corner, who had really actually all along been the ones who'd killed her team. She fired twice. 2 rounds, 2 shadows, and the muzzle flash from the far corner stopped as suddenly as it had started, and then the only sound in the comms building was the hum of the equipment and 2 people breathing on the floor. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Clear, Emily whispered, finally tracking the corners over the sights, her hands steady even now, even after everything. Both down, we're clear. Vale rolled off her and lay flat on his back beside her, and she heard him exhale long and ragged, and it occurred to her that in 3 years of imagining this man, she had never once imagined him tired. In her head, he'd always been the monster, huge and certain and untouchable. The man breathing next to her on the floor was none of those things. He was exhausted, he was older than she remembered, and he was bleeding. You're hit, she said. I'm fine. You're hit, Marcus. She was already moving in hands finding the wound in the dark, his shoulder deep, one of the rounds meant for her that he'd taken instead. You caught one covering me. Wouldn't be the first time, Vale said, and there was something in his voice that broke her a little because it was the voice of the man who'd taught her the man from before the ones she'd mourned. You always did draw fire, Carter. Even when you were 23, couldn't keep your head down to save your life. Shut up, let me look. You know what the worst part of the last 3 years was? Vale said, ignoring her, his voice thin in the dark. It wasn't running, it wasn't the cold, or the hiding or eating out of cans in places that don't have names. It was knowing you were out there hating me. Every day. Knowing that the one person left who understood what we lost had been turned into the thing hunting me. That was the part that nearly finished me. Not the bullets. You. Don't, Emily said, and her voice wasn't steady anymore. Don't do that. Not while I've got my hands in your shoulder. When else am I going to say it? Vale said. Now hold still and let me confess before somebody comes through that door and shoots the both of us for old time's sake. The door burst open and Walker came through it hard and low, with 3 men behind him, weapons up, sweeping the room, and for one terrible second Emily saw it happen. Before it happened, saw Walker's rifle swing toward the man on the floor, the enemy commander, the traitor, the target. No, she shouted, throwing herself over Vale exactly the way he'd thrown himself over her 30 seconds before. No, Commander, hold your fire. He's with me. He's with me. Walker froze, rifle up, finger off the trigger by a hair. Carter. His voice was very careful, the voice a man uses when he thinks the person in front of him might have lost her mind. That's the man you came here to kill. I know who he is. Emily didn't move off Vale, and I was wrong about all of it. About everything. Her voice cracked and she let it because there wasn't time to be strong about this. He's not the one who sold my team. He came here to stop the people who did. The 2 men in that corner, those were the buyers. Those were the ones, and he took a round for me, James. He took a round for me while I still had my finger on a trigger meant for him. The silence in the room was enormous. Walker looked at the 2 bodies in the far corner. He looked at the wound in Vale's shoulder, at Emily's hands pressed against it slick with the man's blood. He was a soldier who'd learned to read the space between what a person did and what they felt, and everything in the room was telling him the same impossible thing. Sir, one of his men said low, That's a wanted man. That's a rogue operator. Protocol says, I know what protocol says, Reyes, Walker said, not lowering the rifle, yet his eyes locked on Vale. I also know that 10 hours ago, protocol said the girl with the junk rifle was a joke, and she just saved every soul on this base. So I'm inclined to give my read of a room a little more weight than protocol tonight. He held Vale's eyes for one more second. Then he lowered the rifle. Medic, he said over his shoulder. Get a medic in here. Now. Then he crouched down beside them, and he looked at the man on the floor. Really looked the way he'd looked at Emily off the truck a lifetime ago that morning. Marcus Vale, he said. Commander? Vale managed something close to a smile. You've got a good soldier here, but I imagine you already know that. She read my whole operation in an afternoon. I built it over a year. He winced as Emily pressed harder on the wound. I'm almost proud, almost. Except she nearly got herself killed doing exactly what I raised her to do, which is walk straight into the fire because she can't stand to let anybody else burn. Stop talking, Emily said. You're losing blood. I've been losing blood for 3 years, Carter. His eyes found hers in the dark, and something passed between them. 3 years of grief on both sides, finally terribly aligning. I need you to listen to me, because I don't know how much time I've got, and there are things you have to know, and I can't put them in a report, and I can't trust them to a radio, and I can't hand them to anyone but you. Timeline maybe 25 minutes since the first shot. Outside, the last of the firefight was guttering out Briggs's voice on the radio, calling the compound secure sector by sector, the base drawing its first full breath since dusk. Inside the comms building, a man was dying slowly and telling a woman the truth she'd been chasing for 3 years, and she was holding his blood inside his body with her bare hands and listening. The mission, Vale said. 3 years ago, it was never a mission. It was a cleanup. We'd found something on the previous op, all 11 of us, we just didn't know we'd found it. A payment trail, money moving from people we were supposed to be fighting into an account that belonged to a man wearing our own flag. His breath rattled. The man who signed our orders, the man who sent us in. He realized what we had before we did. So he sold us a route he knew was compromised and let the ambush do his cleanup for him. 11 witnesses gone in one afternoon, and a grieving country pins a medal on his chest for losing such fine soldiers. Emily's hands had gone cold on the wound. A name, Marcus. Give me the name. 2 came out. Vale went on as if he hadn't heard, as if he had to say the whole thing in order, or he'd never get it out. You and me, and he couldn't touch us, not right away, not 2 decorated survivors under a spotlight. So he waited. He put me on a list, made me a threat instead of a hero. And when I ran, when I went dark to stay alive, he had the perfect story. Marcus Vale gone rogue. Marcus Vale, the traitor. His eyes closed for a second, then opened. And the best part, the part that's so clean it makes me sick, is that he made you the weapon. He knew you'd never stop. He knew grief would point you at me like a rifle. All he had to do was wait for you to find me and pull your own trigger, and both witnesses die in the same room, and he never even has to be there. That's tonight, Walker said quietly. That's this whole thing. This whole thing, Vale agreed. Fort Red Valley was the bait and Emily was the gun. The men in that corner weren't here for your comms, building commander. I'm sorry. They were here to make sure that whatever happened in this room tonight, neither of us walked out of it. If she killed me, they finish her. If I killed her, they finish me. Either way, both survivors of that mission die in the same night 2,000 miles from anyone who'd asked the right questions. And the man who signed our death warrants 3 years ago finally sleeps easy. Emily's whole body was shaking now, not from fear, from something bigger than fear, the sick vertigo of a person watching the entire architecture of their grief rearrange itself into something worse. 3 years. 3 years she'd built her life around a lie. 3 years she'd let hate keep her upright, and now the hate had nowhere to stand. And without it, she felt like she might simply fall through the floor. Then who, she said. Say it. Say the name Marcus, or so help me. Halloran, Vale said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. General Michael Halloran, Vale said. He's got 2 stars now. He's got a corner office and a chest full of ribbons, and a reputation as the man who never forgot the 11 soldiers he lost on a black op that went wrong. His mouth twisted. He speaks at the memorials, Emily, every year. He reads out the 9 names. I've seen the footage. He stands up in his dress uniform, and he reads out the names of the people he sold, and the families cry, and they shake his hand and thank him for remembering. Emily made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She knew the name. Everyone in her world knew the name. Halloran had pinned a medal on her own chest 2 years ago. He had held her hand in both of his at the ceremony, and he had looked into her eyes with what she'd believed was grief, and he had said, "I'm so sorry, Sergeant. They were the finest soldiers I ever commanded." And she had believed him. She had wept, and she had thanked him, and she had walked away thinking there was at least one man at the top who understood what she'd lost. "He touched my hand," Emily whispered. "He looked me in the eye and told me they were the finest soldiers he ever commanded. And I thanked him, Marcus. I thanked the man who killed them." "I know," Vale said gently. "He's good at it. It's the thing that makes him so dangerous. He doesn't just hide the crime. He wears the grief. He's the loudest mourner at every funeral. Who's ever going to look at the man crying hardest and think that's the one who did it?" "I have proof," Vale went on, and his voice was fading and he forced it back. "The payment trail, the compromise route order with his signature. 3 years I've been running, and the only reason I ran instead of dying is that I've been building a case that can't be buried. It's real. It's documented. It's enough to end him." His hand found her wrist, and his grip was weaker than it should have been, and that frightened her more than anything. "But I can't be the one to deliver it. A dead traitor's evidence is worthless." Marcus Vale hands a folder to an investigator, and it disappears, and so does the investigator. "It has to be you. You're the hero. You're the one they'll believe. The girl with the junk rifle who saved a base. You walk that evidence into the right room, and Halloran can't make you disappear because the whole country just watched you become a legend tonight." "I don't care about being a legend," Emily said, and now she was crying, and she didn't care about that either. "I care that I spent 3 years hating you. I care that I came here to kill the one person who was trying to make it right. I care that you're lying on this floor bleeding out because you covered a woman who had a gun pointed at your heart." "Marcus, I would have done it. If you hadn't stopped me on that ridge, if I'd had a clear shot, I would have pulled the trigger and I would have killed you, and I never would have known. But you didn't," Vale said. "That's the thing, Carter. In 3 years of me watching you hunt me, you had a dozen chances a smarter, colder soldier would have taken. And every single time some part of you held off. Some part of you needed to look me in the eye first, to ask why." His grip tightened on her wrist. "That's not weakness. That's the thing that separates you from him. Halloran never once needed to look anybody in the eye. He signed a piece of paper, and 11 people died, and he went to lunch. You couldn't even shoot the man you'd convinced yourself was the devil because you needed to be sure. Don't you ever let anyone tell you that made you soft. It's the only reason either of us is alive to end him." The medic arrived then, dropping down beside them, hands moving fast over the wound, and for a minute there was only the work of trying to keep a man from dying. Emily moved back to give the medic room, and her hands were red, and she stared at them like they belonged to someone else. Walker crouched beside her. "Is it true?" he said quietly. "All of it. A 2-star general. Is that where this goes?" "It's true," Emily said. "I don't have the proof in my hands yet, but I've spent 3 years learning to tell when Marcus Vale is lying and he's not lying. Everything about tonight only makes sense if he's telling the truth. Why send professionals 2,000 miles for a nothing base? Why the trap built specifically around me? Why 2 men waiting in this exact room?" She looked at Walker. "It was never about Red Valley, Commander. Your base was just the quiet corner of the world where 2 inconvenient witnesses could be erased without anybody important noticing." Walker was quiet for a long moment. He was a career soldier. He believed in the chain of command the way some men believed in God. And what Emily was telling him was that somewhere near the top of that chain sat a man who had murdered 11 of his own to cover a crime and had spent 3 years being honored for it. "You understand what you're saying," Walker said. "You understand what it means if it's real. Not just for you, for everybody who ever saluted that man, for everybody who believes the system catches the Hallorans instead of promoting them." "I understand exactly what it means," Emily said. "I've been living inside what it means for 3 years. I just had the wrong villain." "If you're wrong," Walker said slowly, "and you take this to anyone, they'll bury you. Halloran's a general. You're a sergeant with a redacted file and a dead man's word." "I know. And if you're right, Walker went on, and you take it to the wrong person, they'll bury you faster because the wrong person is on his side and you'll never see it coming. He shook his head. You can't trust the chain of command with this Carter. The chain of command is exactly what he used to kill your team. You go up the ladder and somewhere on that ladder is a rung that's his. Then I go outside the ladder, Emily said. There's people I trust, Walker said. Not many, but a few. People who've got no love for men like Halloran and no career left to protect. I'll make calls, careful ones. We build this right or we don't build it at all. He looked at her. But that's tomorrow's fight. Tonight you keep that man breathing because a live witness who can point at the evidence is worth 10 times a dead one, no matter how good the folder is. The medic looked up and his face said what his voice confirmed. He's stable, barely, but he needs a surgeon, and he needs one in the next hour or the shoulder's the least of his problems. There's internal bleeding I can't touch out here. Then we get him a surgeon, Walker said, standing. Grant, I want the fastest bird you can find inbound 5 minutes ago. Medical priority, and I want it flying to a facility I choose, not the nearest one. If there's a rung on the ladder that's Halloran's, I don't want this man landing on it. Grant moved. Briggs appeared in the doorway, then filthy, exhausted blood on his sleeve that wasn't his, and he took in the scene, the 2 dead men in the corner, the wounded stranger on the floor, Emily's red hands, and Walker could see him trying to make it fit and failing. Somebody want to tell me what I'm looking at, Briggs said, because an hour ago, that man was the enemy commander, and now we're calling him a medevac. That man just saved Carter's life, Walker said, and Carter just saved all of ours. The rest of it is complicated, and it's classified as of this second, and I need you to trust me the same way you learned to trust her. He held Briggs's eyes. Can you do that, Sergeant? Briggs looked at Emily, at the man on the floor, at the woman he'd humiliated a day ago and would have followed into hell by now. After tonight, Briggs said quietly, I'll trust whatever she tells me, even this. He looked at Emily. What do you need from me, Carter? Get to the loft, Emily said. Hutchins is up there. Tell him it's over. Tell him he did good, and tell him, her voice caught, tell him to bring me my rifle. And Briggs, don't let anyone else touch it. Not anyone. That rifle doesn't leave your sight until it's back in my hands. You understand me? Briggs frowned at the strange intensity of it, but he nodded. It's just you and me touch that rifle. Got it. And he was gone. And that was when Vale's hand tightened one more time on Emily's wrist, and his voice when it came was much weaker than before and much more urgent. Emily, listen, if I don't make it, you're going to make it. The bird's coming. You hold on. If I don't make it, Vale pressed, and there was no fear in it, only urgency. The last strength of a man spending everything he had left on the thing that mattered most. The evidence is in a place only you'll find. I made it that way. 3 years ago, I looked at how everyone I loved died in one afternoon, and I decided I would build the one thing they couldn't kill, a truth that outlived me. But it's useless if it dies with me, and it's useless if you can't find it. His eyes were struggling to stay open now. The rifle. Emily went cold. What? The scratch, Vale breathed. In the stock. The one I put there. You never let me replace the rifle. 3 years I prayed you never would, because you always kept it no matter what you kept it, because it was mine, and it was yours, and it was the team's. His voice was fading. It's not just a scratch, Carter. It never was. Open it. When you're safe, open the stock along the scratch, and you'll have everything you need to end him. I put it in the one place I knew you'd never lose and he'd never think to look. In the junk rifle, the one everybody laughs at. Emily's breath left her body. You've been carrying the evidence that ends the man who killed our team, Vale whispered, for 3 years on your own back, and you never knew. The rifle they told you was worthless. His mouth curved, one last ghost of the man who'd trained her. Turns out it was the most valuable thing in the whole United States Army. You just had to know what it was really worth, same as you. When did you? Emily started and couldn't finish. The last time I saw you was the day we came home. The debrief. You put it in that day. That's the last time you had my rifle in your hands. That's the last time I had it. Vale agreed, so faint now she had to lean close to hear. I knew what Halloran was even then. I looked at you across that debrief table, 23 years old, already broken, still not knowing the man across the room had killed them, and I made a choice. I couldn't tell you. You'd have gone straight at him, and he'd have killed you inside a week. So I hid the truth in the one thing I knew you'd never let go of, and I let you hate me, and I ran. And I waited for the day you'd be strong enough and safe enough to open it. His eyes found hers one last time. This is that day, Carter. You just had to survive a war to get here. His eyes closed. Marcus, Emily gripped his hand hard. Marcus, stay with me. Stay awake. That's an order. You don't get to tell me all that and then check out. You hear me? You don't get to hand me the truth and then leave me alone to carry it. Not again. Not you too. Better shot than me. He murmured, barely audible now. Always were. Take the shot that matters, Carter. You'll know the one. And Emily, the faintest breath. I'm sorry for letting you hate me. It was the only way to keep you alive. Forgive me if you can. And if you can't, a ghost of the old warmth end him anyway. His hand went slack in hers. Medic! Emily screamed, and then the room was motion and noise, and the medic working over Vale's chest and Walker pulling Emily back so they could work, and Emily on her knees on the floor of the comms building with a dead man's blood on her hands and a 3-year-old wound torn all the way open. The rotors of the incoming helicopter were audible now, growing a hard thudding promise coming in over the mountains. And at the same moment, Briggs's boots on the stairs, and behind him, Hutchins, pale and shaking and alive, carrying in both hands, like something holy, the old scratched rifle that everyone on the base had laughed at, that held inside its worn wooden stock the one truth that could bring down a general. Ma'am, Hutchins said softly, holding it out to her. Your rifle. Nobody touched it but me. I swear it. Emily rose from beside Vale and she took the rifle from the boy's hands, and she held it the way she'd held it her whole adult life, close, like the only thing in the world she trusted. Her thumb found the long scratch in the stock the way it always did, the way it had 1,000 times a small, unconscious motion of comfort in the worst moments of her life. Except now she knew. Now she knew that every single time she'd run her thumb along that scratch to steady herself, she'd been touching the truth. That through 3 years of grief and rage and hunting the wrong man, the thing that had actually killed her team had been riding on her own shoulder the whole time, hidden in the one possession she'd never once put down. Outside, the sun was starting to come up over the mountains that had hidden Marcus Vale for 3 years. And Emily Carter stood in the blood and the noise with the junk rifle in her hands, and she looked down at the man who had died to give her the truth, and she understood with absolute clarity that the battle for Fort Red Valley had never been the real war at all. It had only been the opening shot. Marcus Vale did not die on the floor of the comms building. The bird got there in time, and the surgeon Walker chose was 2 states away from anyone Halloran could reach. And for 6 hours, a man Emily had mourned for 3 years fought to stay in a world that had given him almost nothing but running and grief. She rode with him. She held his hand the whole flight, and she talked to him even when he couldn't hear her, because the last time she'd let a teammate slip away in silence, she'd carried it for 3 years. And she was done being silent with the people she loved. You don't get to quit, she told him over the rotor noise over the medic's readouts. You spent 3 years keeping yourself alive out of pure spite so you could hand me the truth. You don't get to hand it to me and then let go. That's not how it works, Marcus. You taught me you finish what you start. So finish this. Wake up. He didn't wake up on the flight, but he didn't let go either. And when they wheeled him out of surgery gray and hollowed out and breathing on his own, the surgeon told Emily he'd never seen a man that badly hurt, hold on that hard, and Emily said, you don't know him. He's the most stubborn man alive. He came back from the dead once already. This is just the second time. She didn't leave the hospital for 2 days. Walker tried to make her rest, and she wouldn't. Briggs flew out and sat with her through one long night and didn't say much because there wasn't much to say. But the fact that the man who'd thrown her rifle in the dirt was now sitting beside her at 3 a.m. in a hospital corridor said everything on its own. I keep thinking about it, Briggs said quietly somewhere in the small hours. How close I came. Not just to you, to all of it. If you'd walked off that range like nothing was wrong, if the commander hadn't listened to you, if I'd kept being the loudmouth I was, that first day this whole base is gone. And I'd have died never knowing I was standing next to the one person who could have saved us because I was too busy laughing at her rifle. You didn't die, Emily said. And you did listen. Eventually. Barely. Barely counts, Emily said. Out here, barely is the whole game. Nobody gets it right the first time, Briggs. You just have to get it right before it's too late. She looked at him. You did. That's more than a lot of men manage. She didn't open the rifle right away. She wanted to. Every hour that Vale lay unconscious, every hour that the truth sat at a strip of scratched wood on her shoulder, she wanted to. But she made herself wait because she'd spent 3 years learning what happened when grief made her move too fast, and she was not going to lose the one shot that mattered by opening the evidence in the wrong room in front of the wrong person. So she waited until she was somewhere she trusted, a small safe house. Walker's people had arranged doors locked, no cameras, no chain of command, no rung that might be Halloran's. And then with Walker on one side of her and a laptop open in front of her, she took the junk rifle across her knees the way she had 10,000 times, and this time instead of running her thumb along the scratch, she pressed her nail into it in pride. The stock split along the scratch. It had been cut and rejoined so cleanly that in 3 years of daily handling, she'd never once felt the seam. Inside the hollow, wrapped in oilcloth, was a slim waterproof drive, no bigger than her thumb. Her hands, which had never shaken in a firefight, shook now. That's it, Walker said quietly. That's the whole thing. That's 9 funerals, Emily said. That's 3 years. She looked at the little drive in her palm. This is what I was carrying the whole time. Every time somebody laughed at this rifle, every time Briggs called it junk, I had the thing that ends a general sitting in my hands, and I didn't know it. Nobody did, Walker said. That was the point. He hid it in the one place so obvious nobody would ever think to look, and so precious to you that you'd never put it down. That's not luck, Carter. That's a man who knew you better than anyone alive. She plugged in the drive. For a long time, neither of them spoke, because what was on it wasn't a rumor or a dead man's word. It was a payment trail account to account dated with the money moving from a foreign source into a shell company and out again into places that led one careful step at a time back to a single name. It was the original mission order, the one that had sent 11 soldiers down a route that was already compromised, and at the bottom of it in ink was a signature. It was a recording, a phone call, a man's voice arranging the timing of an ambush as casually as arranging a lunch. And it was all connected cross-reference built by a man who'd spent 3 years with nothing to do but make a case that could not be broken. He didn't just survive out there, Emily said softly. He built a courtroom, piece by piece, for 3 years. General Michael Halloran, Walker said, reading the name over and over like he couldn't make it real. This ends him 100 times over. If it gets to the right room, Emily said. That's still the whole problem, isn't it? He's a 2-star general with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation as America's grieving hero. And I'm a sergeant with a junk rifle and a story so big nobody's going to want to believe it. The evidence is real, but real isn't the same as safe. That was the moment her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't answer, and then something in her gut told her to, and she did. Sergeant Carter. The voice was warm, fatherly, familiar. This is General Michael Halloran. I've just been briefed on the incredible events at Fort Red Valley. I wanted to call you personally. What you did, the courage you showed the whole army, is talking about it. I'm putting you in for a commendation. Emily's blood went to ice water. Walker, watching her face, went still. General, Emily said, and she made her voice light, made it grateful, made it the voice of a young sergeant honored beyond words to hear from a legend. Sir, I don't know what to say. It's an honor to hear from you. The honor's mine, Sergeant. Truly. A pause, and underneath the warmth she could hear it now. The thing she'd been too grief-blind to hear when he held her hand 2 years ago. The faint, cold calculation running beneath the fatherly tone like a current under ice. I understand there was a survivor. From the enemy side, a man in custody. There it was. There was Sir, Emily said carefully. He didn't make it. Died on the floor before the medevac reached him. We recovered no intelligence of value from him. She kept her voice steady, easy, disappointed even. He took whatever he knew with him. A silence on the line, just a beat too long. That's a shame, Halloran said finally. And the warmth was still there, and now Emily could hear exactly what it was, a mask worn so long the man had forgotten it was a mask. A real shame. We'd have liked to know who sent them. But sometimes the enemy denies us even that. Another pause. You did good work out there, Carter. Get some rest. And Sergeant, if you come across anything Anything at all in the aftermath, any documents, any effects, you bring them straight to me. Chain of command. We don't want sensitive material floating around in the wrong hands. You understand? Perfectly, sir, Emily said. You'll be the first to know. Good girl. The line went dead. Emily set the phone down very carefully, and then she looked at Walker and her face had changed. The grief was still there and the exhaustion, but underneath them, something had gone hard and clear and absolutely certain the way it went right before she took a shot. He knows Vale's alive, she said. Or he suspects it. He's fishing. He wanted to hear me say the survivor was dead, so he'd know whether he still had a problem. She stood up, and I just told him exactly what he wanted to hear, which means for the next few days he thinks he's safe. He thinks the only two witnesses are a dead man and a grateful little sergeant who's going to bring him any evidence like a good soldier. That buys us time, Walker said. That buys us everything. Emily picked up the rifle and the drive, and for the first time in 3 years, the exhaustion in her eyes had somewhere to go. He just made the same mistake everybody makes. Briggs made it. The whole base made it. He looked at the junk and he didn't see the weapon. He thinks I'm harmless because I look harmless. He thinks the grieving little sergeant is his tool. Her jaw set. He's about to find out what this rifle's really worth. Same as everybody else did. There's a risk in the waiting, Walker said. Every day he's free is a day he might figure it out. A day he might send someone. We're gambling that a live sergeant and a hidden drive stay hidden long enough to build this right. We're not gambling, Emily said. Gambling is what I did when I walked into that comms building certain and alone. This is different. This is patient. There's a word Vale used to use on the range on the bad days when I wanted to rush the shot. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and he'd say, slow as smooth, Carter. Smooth as well. I spent 3 years forgetting that. I'm not forgetting it again. She looked at Walker. We do this slow, we do this smooth. And it'll be the fastest fall that man ever took. The next part didn't happen fast, and Emily made her peace with that because she'd learned the hardest way there was that moving too fast got people killed. Walker made his careful calls. The people he trusted turned out to know other people they trusted. Investigators with no love for generals and no careers left to lose, the kind of quiet, stubborn people who'd been waiting their whole lives for something like this to land in their hands. The evidence was copied and copied again, and placed in enough hands in enough places that no single disappearance could bury it. If anything happened to Emily Carter now, the truth would surface in a dozen rooms at once. Vale had built the courtroom. Walker built the walls around it. There was one bad night in the middle of it. A car outside the safe house that sat too long. A man who lingered near the hospital where Vale was recovering, asking the wrong questions, until Briggs, who had appointed himself Vale's guard without being asked, had a very quiet conversation with him, and the man did not come back. Halloran was starting to sweat. Somewhere in his gut, the instinct that had kept him alive and undetected for 3 years was whispering that something was wrong, that the grateful little sergeant had sounded a shade too calm on the phone, that the pieces weren't sitting right. But by the time his instinct became certainty, it was already too late, because Emily Carter had done the one thing he never expected. She had been patient. She had refused to give him the fast, sloppy, emotional move he'd built his whole trap around. She had waited until the walls were up on every side, and then, and only then, she moved. And through all of it, Marcus Vale slowly came back. The first time he opened his eyes and found her sitting beside the hospital bed, he looked at her for a long moment, and then his gaze dropped to the rifle across her knees, and he saw the seam in the stock split and empty, and he understood. You found it, he said, his voice a ruin. I found it. Then it's done. It's not done, Emily said. It started. There's a difference. You taught me that too. She leaned forward. But Marcus, you don't get to disappear again. You hear me? You spent 3 years letting me think you were the enemy. That's over. Whatever comes next, you face it standing next to me, not running from me. I already buried you once. I'm not doing it twice. Something moved in the wreck of his face, something that might have been the first peace he'd felt in 3 years. Standing next to you, he said. Yeah, I think I'd like that. I've been running so long, I forgot there was another option. There's always another option, Emily said. You just have to be brave enough to stop running long enough to see it. Somebody wise told me that once. On a base in Montana. She glanced toward the door where Walker was leaning against the frame. He's not as good a shot as you, but he's a better man than either of us gave the army credit for. He believed you, Vale said, that first day, before you'd proved anything. He looked at a redacted file and a girl with an old rifle, and he decided to trust you. He shook his head slowly against the pillow. You know how rare that is. 3 years I watched people look at me and see a traitor because a piece of paper told them to. And this man looked at you and saw the truth before you'd shown him a single reason to. Hold on to that one, Carter. Men like that are worth more than any evidence. I intend to, Emily said quietly. There was a silence then, comfortable the silence of two people who had crossed the same 3 years of grief from opposite sides and finally had arrived in the same room. The 9, Vale said at last. Tell me you're going to say their names when it's over, when he's in a cell. Somebody has to say their names as the truth, not as his cover. They deserve that. They've deserved it for 3 years. I'm going to say their names, Emily said. Everyone, out loud, in the light. And this time nobody's going to shake the killer's hand afterward and thank him for remembering. Her voice caught. I promise you that, Marcus. On the 9. Same as you promised me. The reckoning, when it came the way these things do when they're built right all at once and from every direction, so there's nowhere left to run. The investigators moved on a Tuesday morning. The evidence hit the right desks and the right sealed courtrooms, and at exactly the right moment, the right sunlight. And Michael Halloran, 2-star General America's grieving hero, the man who read out 9 names every year in his dress uniform, discovered that the grateful little sergeant he'd called Good Girl on the phone had been holding a knife to his throat the entire time, and he'd never once seen it because he'd made the same mistake every man in this story had made. He'd looked at Emily Carter and seen something small. They took his stars first, then his freedom. Emily was in the room when they read the charges, and Halloran turned and looked at her. And for 1 second, the mask came all the way off, and she saw the thing underneath the small, cold nothing of a man who had murdered 11 people and gone to lunch. And she understood that Vale had been right. This was a man who had never once needed to look anyone in the eye. It was the thing that had made him so hard to catch. And in the end, it was the thing that damned him because he had never learned to see the people he stepped on, and so he had never seen her coming. You, Halloran said, you were nothing, a junk rifle and a redacted file. How? Emily stood up. She had the rifle over her shoulder the way she always did worn wood, and scratch stock the weapon that had ended him and that he'd looked at if he'd ever looked at it at all, and dismissed as garbage. That's the thing about the ones you throw in the dirt, General, she said. You never bother to check what they can do. You just decide they're worthless, and you move on, and you never once wonder if the thing you're laughing at is the thing that's going to bury you. She looked at him, and there was no hate left in her, and that was somehow worse for him than hate would have been. You read their names every year, 9 names. You stood up in your uniform, and you read them out, and you let their families thank you. I'm going to make sure those names get read out one more time, in a courtroom next to yours. You think this ends me, Halloran said, and even now, even ruined, he reached for the old mask. I have friends, Sergeant. I have people who... You had people, Emily said. Every one of them just watched you become the most radioactive name in the Army. Nobody's coming for you, General. That's the part men like you never understand until it's too late. The moment you stop being useful, you stopped having friends. All you've got left now is the truth. And the truth was never on your side. She turned and walked out, and she did not look back because he wasn't worth the turn of her head, and they both knew it. It ended in the way that mattered on a clear, cold morning some months later at a memorial that Michael Halloran did not speak at because Michael Halloran was in a cell where he would stay until he died. The 9 names were read that day by someone who had actually earned the right. Emily stood at the front in her dress uniform, and beside her stood a man in a wheelchair who the official record now listed not as a traitor, but as what he had always been, the soldier who had spent 3 years alone in the dark building, the one thing his enemies couldn't kill. The families were there, the 9 families, and this time when the names were read, they were read by someone who had loved the people they belonged to and who had crossed 3 years in a war and the length of her own grief to make sure they were finally spoken as truth instead of as cover. She read all 9, slowly, clearly. She did not rush a single one because each of them had waited 3 years to be spoken cleanly, and she was not going to hurry them now. And when she finished, she stood in the silence and she let it hold, and the families wept, and this time there was no killer's hand to shake, only the truth standing in the open at last. Afterward, a young woman came up to Emily, the daughter of one of the 9, maybe 16, and she didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at the old rifle Emily still carried, even here, even in dress uniform, because some things you carry and you don't explain them. My dad talked about that rifle, the girl said finally, before. He said there was a sergeant on the team who wouldn't trade it for anything. He said you could put a rack of brand new weapons in front of her and she'd still pick the old scratched one every time. The girl's eyes were wet. He thought that was the finest thing about you, that you knew what things were really worth, even when nobody else did. Emily's throat closed. For a moment, she couldn't speak at all. Your father, she managed, was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with, and he was right about the rifle, but he was wrong about one thing. She put her hand on the girl's shoulder. It wasn't the finest thing about me. Knowing what a thing is worth when everybody else calls it junk, that was the finest thing about him and about all 9 of them. They taught me to see it. I just carried it home. The girl looked at her for a long moment. They caught the man who did it because of you, because you never stopped. Because none of us stopped, Emily said. Your father included. He's part of why. They all are. I just got to be the one still standing at the end to say so. The girl nodded slowly, and then she did something Emily didn't expect. She reached out and laid her hand very gently on the scratched stock of the old rifle, the way you'd touch something that mattered. And then she stepped back and straightened, and for a second she looked so much like the man Emily had buried 3 years ago that it took the breath out of her. Thank you, the girl said. And then she walked back to her family, and Emily watched her go, and something that had been clenched shut in her chest for 3 years finally quietly let go. Walker found her later standing apart, looking at nothing, the rifle on her shoulder. You did it, he said. You know that, right? You actually did it. 3 years and you did it. We did it, Emily said. You, Marcus, that kid Hutchins holding aloft, he had no business holding. Briggs, who threw my rifle in the dirt and then followed me into a firefight the same day. She almost smiled. Nobody wins this alone. I told him that. Turns out it was true. Hutchins made sergeant, Walker said. Did you hear kid from Ohio? Says he wants to be a sniper. Says he learned everything he knows from one night in a loft with your rifle in his hands. He learned the important part, Emily said. He learned to be a wall. He learned to decide fear doesn't get to drive. She shook her head. 19 years old. He held that loft like a man twice his age. I told him to survive the night. He did better than survive. He held the line so I could walk into that building and come out with the truth. That kid's gonna be better than me someday. He'll never believe that. That's exactly why he'll get there, Emily said. What now? Walker said. You told me once you never let yourself think past the day Vale was in the ground. Well, he's not in the ground, neither's the truth. So what does Emily Carter do now that the war she's been fighting for 3 years is finally over? Emily was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. You told me something that night in the loft, she said. You said the only revenge that means anything is to outlive them, to go build the thing they tried to steal. She turned to him. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Halloran took a future from me 3 years ago, took the version of me that got to have one. She let out a slow breath. So I'm going to go take it back, all of it. Every year he tried to steal. I'm going to be a person who has a life and not just a mission. That's the last shot, the one that actually wins. Take the shot that matters, Walker said quietly. You'll know the one. He said that, Emily said. Marcus, on the floor of your comms building when he thought he was dying. He said, take the shot that matters, you'll know the one. She looked down at the rifle at the scratch at the seam that had held the truth for 3 years. I always thought the shot that matters was the one that ends the enemy. Turns out it's the one that ends the war. And those aren't always the same shot. Walker put out his hand and she took it, and they shook 2 soldiers who had come off a boring base in Montana and walked through fire together and come out the other side. For what it's worth, Walker said, the day you got off that truck, I told my XO to find out who you were, because you scared me. I still remember thinking it. He smiled. Turns out I was right to be scared, just wrong about who should have been. Halloran should have been, Emily said. He just never learned to look. No, Walker agreed. He never did. She shouldered the old rifle one last time, the worn wood, the scratched stock, The weapon a whole base had laughed at, the weapon that had saved that base and ended a general and carried 9 names home. And she understood finally completely the thing this rifle had been trying to teach her since the day a young team leader dropped it climbing a wall and told her the scratch made it hers. A weapon does not make a soldier, and a soldier does not need a loud voice or a clean file or a rifle worth a fortune to be the one who changes everything. Emily Carter had never needed those things. She had only needed to know what she was truly worth on the days when nobody else could see it, and to keep standing until the world caught up. They had called her rifle junk. They had called her nothing. They had thrown her weapon in the dirt and laughed, and they had looked at a quiet woman with a scratched old rifle and decided there was nothing there worth fearing. They were wrong. The rifle they threw in the dirt became the rifle that brought down a general. The sniper they laughed at became the soldier who carried 9 names out of the dark and set them down at last in the light where they belonged. And Emily Carter learned the one truth that outlasts every battle, every grave, and every man who ever mistook quiet for weakness. A weapon does not make the soldier, and a soldier does not make the weapon worth, is not given by the ones who judge from the outside, but proven by the one who refuses to be thrown away. She was never the junk rifle. She was the hand that knew what it was worth. And in the end, that was the only thing that ever mattered.